Every time we get to our graduation service, and I always think about, life and all of our volunteers, we hang out with high school and middle school students all the time. And one thing I always think about, especially around graduation season, is remembering high school years. And so maybe for you here this morning, you're kind of remembering some of your high school years and some of the memories that you had graduating in high school. And if you're like me, there was a friend. There's always that one friend that you have that can talk you into doing anything, right? There's always that one friend. And if you don't have that friend in your group, you're probably the friend that can talk your other friends into doing things. And so I had a friend in high school that really could talk and talk me into doing anything. And in high school, I've gained a few weight since being married and having a child, and now we're on to having our second child too. And so I was really skinny in high school, and I had asthma, and so I always would carry my inhaler. I still carry my inhaler with me. But I had a friend that started running track, and in junior year he was like, "Hey man, have you ever thought about running track?" And I'm like, "No, not at all." It's like, "Do you know me? Like, I can't even run without even using my inhaler." And so he convinced me to do it. I wasn't playing any sport or anything. And I was like, "Sure, I can run track. We'll try this." And so he pumped me up in doing it. The first practice for track was, all right, hey, we're going to do a warm-up together, and it's going to be 3 miles. We're going to do a 3-mile warm-up. And I was like, excuse me, what are we doing? And I remember looking at my friend like with laser beam eyes thinking, I cannot believe. And once you're already in it, it's like hard to walk out. So I just start running, and of course we're running. I graduated from Butler, and we're running through the neighborhood out there, and everyone is like long gone. And here comes this truck, our coach at the time, and he was coming alongside. He's like, all right, let's keep going. He was motivating me to finish. And I remember coming to the first meet. And the other thing about track, which my friend didn't tell me about, was you had to wear these really, really short shorts. And so track meet comes, and I hadn't told all my other friends that I was running track because I did not want them to see how horrible I could run. And then 2, I did not want them to see me in my short shorts. And so we show up for the first meet, and I'm running I'm like getting down on the block, and I've had horrible training when it comes to that, so I'm just like, you look at the other people, what are they doing, how are they getting ready, and then the races start, and as soon as I make it back around, I notice on the end, up on the stadium, I see my friends. Not only do I see my friends, but I see them with big giant posters, and they are encouraging me to run, and of course they came into last place, but I remember being horrified of that. But in track, there was one group that took one race, which was the relay race, that took a lot of coordination. Because if you know anything about track, the relay race is really important. One, because there's a baton, and you have to pass off the baton correctly. And if you make a mistake passing off the baton, it can cost you the whole entire race. And so, as you know, I was nowhere near being able to run the relay race, but I remember learning about the technique that our teammates took to pass off the baton. It was all about the transition that was important to be successful in running the race. And so when I think about that, when I think about graduation, I think about a transition. We're transitioning on to another chapter. And I look back and I think about the time running track, and I think about this transition that happens in this relay race from one person to another and kind of running the race and continuing on, because it's really important in track that the baton is passed off well, which is also true as us as a church, as parents, as grandparents, and anybody as a believer. It's important how we pass off the baton. And so today we're going to be looking specifically, Paul is an amazing missionary going around at the time spreading the word. And see, his story is really crazy if you know anything about him. He spent the first part of his life killing Christians, and then came to a Jesus encounter and trusted in the Lord and began a crazy ministry of just spreading the gospel. But he had several guys with him that he would take with him, and one was Timothy. And he wrote some letters to Timothy and to encouraging him in this transition, because Paul knew that his life would not last forever and that he needed to invest in the the next generation that was going to carry on the baton. And so Paul wrote to Timothy and encouraging him. And man, I wish we could spend all day just looking in Timothy because there are such great encouragements to us as believers in spreading the good news here today. But we're going to look specifically, and it'll be on the screen too, or you can turn to 2 Timothy chapter 2. We're going to be there, and we're going to be looking at two verses that I believe are really key when talking about passing on the baton. It kind of gives out this blueprint of what it looks like for us. And so if you'll follow along with me, 2 Timothy 2, verse 1 and 2, it says this, "You then," remember this is Paul writing this to Timothy, "You then, my child, be strengthened by the grace that is in Christ Jesus. And what you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men, who will be able to teach others also." And so I don't know if you caught that there, and leave it up on the screen for a second. I don't know if you caught that there, but look right here in verse 2, and it says, and what you have heard from me, and Paul's telling to Timothy, in the presence of many witnesses, entrusted to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. I don't know if you're like me, but you see an image of almost like a relay race right there. Look, you see Paul as kind of the first leg, and then you see Timothy as kind of the second leg, and then you see faithful people, and then you see others. And so Paul is kind of mapping out discipleship in a sense. He's saying, hey, this is what it looks like for us to teach others about who Jesus is. And he's saying, Paul's telling Timothy to go to find faithful people to entrust this with, and then those people will find other people to tell other people. And here recently, me and David Scott have been spending some time in Acts, and it's the beginning of really the church, and we're looking at really how the church is really spread. And it is awesome when we look at this, we can look at this and say, man, that was many years ago, but these truths here are the same truths that apply to us today. And Paul was really great at that and kind of passing on the baton to Timothy. And we see that image of a relay race. And you know, this is actually the heart of our youth ministry and children's ministries here at Ormsby Heights. We know that we as a church, as a ministry, as children's ministry, as youth ministry, do not replace the roles that parents play in the lives of students. We cannot replace that role. And so for us, we want to come alongside grandparents and parents and partner with them in showing kids and showing students what Jesus looks like so that one day that they will trust in him with their lives. And so for us, that's the heartbeat of our church, and I'm so thankful to serve along a pastor who puts such emphasis on youth and kids. And it is awesome being in a church that supports that as a vision. And so we are excited as a church because that is our heartbeat. We want to partner alongside families. And one thing I always talk to our volunteers that serve in our student ministry, I always say Wednesday night is our big worship service that we do over in the other building. I say, I'm not concerned so much about the numbers as far as how many are attending on Wednesday night than I am about what takes place when that student leaves our building and goes and gets in their van with their mom, goes home with their family and goes to school the next day. What are they doing on that Thursday morning? Are they living out what they've learned at church, or do they just drop it off at the door when they leave out? Because for us, attendance is great. We want as many students as possible, but we're concerned about what happens when that student returns on Thursday morning to their classroom, to a classroom full of students who are lost. We want to see students who are equipped to be able to share the gospel. One thing I always say to students is I say, you are far better equipped to share the gospel with your friend than just simply bringing them on a Wednesday night and letting me share the gospel. Yeah, the Lord works through that, but you have a unique relationship, and the Lord wants to use you to talk about Jesus to them. And so when we look back at Timothy, we see in 2 Timothy, we see this relay and this passing the baton off. And so being a part of the church and being a part in youth ministry, the problem that we see oftentimes is that there's really bad handoffs or dropped batons throughout the year. And as we're watching graduates transition on into life after youth group, that's a big concern for us. But it doesn't necessarily mean just for youth ministry. What does it look like for parents and grandparents, for small group leaders, for children's volunteers, for bosses, for teachers, for any believer? How are you passing on the baton? And so, obviously being the youth pastor, I focus and look at, okay, how are we equipping students to do this? But as a believer, how are we equipping the next generation? How are we passing off the baton? And so if we really believe what Paul is saying in 2 Timothy, then we as the church as a whole have to figure out how to pass off the baton well. How do we do that as a believer? How do we pass off the baton well? Well, today we're going to look at 3 different rules that are actually listed in the United States Track and Field Handbook. And the reason why we're looking at those is because I think there's some real good spiritual truths that we can learn from some of that and taking from what we know in 2 Timothy. The first rule, in rule number 25, states this: the baton shall be a smooth, hollow, circular tube made of wood, metal, and other rigid material in one piece. Its length shall be between 28 and 30 centimeters. Its circumference shall be 12 to 13 centimeters, and it shall not weigh less than 50 grams. And no material or substance may be applied to the baton. And I'm going to share 3 things as far as passing the baton off well. And the first thing, from getting from this rule, the baton, it has to be the right baton to pass off. And so what is our baton? As the church, as a believer, it's the gospel. It's the good news that we are passing off. Sometimes when it comes to investing in other people, we get caught up in a lot of good things, but they're not the right things. And so maybe we're concerned about good behavior, strong grades, athletic success, scholarships. Those are all great things, but sometimes we get focused on the good things and we lose sight of the God things. And those things aren't bad, those are great things, and we want that for students, we want that. But are we so focused on the good things that we lose sight of the God things in life? And so when we're interacting, just as a believer, when we're interacting with other people, the gospel is the most important thing that we can communicate to the lost world. And so sometimes as the church, we get so concerned that lost people don't act like saved people. And the most important thing that person needs is the gospel of Jesus Christ, the good news that we can share with them. Sometimes we get caught up in giving a list of rules and saying, hey, this is what you need to do, instead of starting with this is who Jesus is, and this is what he's done for you, and this is how he can transform your life. And allowing the Holy Spirit to do the work in that person's life. And I think the reason why that person, those lost people, we just talked about this, don't act like saved people is because they haven't encountered Jesus who can change their life. And so let's, as the church and as believers, let's focus on what matters. So as parents, when we're passing off the baton, and it means a whole new thing to me now, having a child, of course, I want great things for my son, and I want him to be successful in life, but the greatest responsibility that I have as a parent is passing the baton off, the good news of Jesus. And as the church, we have a job in doing that together. And so let's look at the second thing. Rule number 2 in the handbook says this. It says, each takeover zone shall be 20 meters long, of which the scratch line is in the center. The zone shall start and finish at the edges of the zone and nearest the start line in the running direction. And so what this rule is saying is it's saying the space to pass on the baton in track is limited by 20 meters. And so the second thing that we need to understand, besides passing on the right baton, is that the space passing on the baton is limited. And what do I mean by that? Each lane and track, as you're running, you come to this point where you can hand over the baton. And if you fail to do that in that zone, then you could be disqualified for that. It can cost you the race. And one thing is having a child, one thing that is always said to new parents is, man, they grow up fast. You'll blink your eye and they are gone. And, that is a true reality. And even at graduation, I always hear that from parents too. Man, they just grow up so fast. And so for us, we have to keep in mind, for me and my wife, there is a day, let's say, at the age of 18, our son could move out. He probably won't be able to do that. Most 18-year-olds aren't able to do that. But let's just say reality, 18, he could move out on his own. And so what am I doing to prepare our son for that day when he leaves us? What am I doing? And so for me, it's focusing on that day. So many times we get caught up on the here and now and what's going on in life that we fail to lift our eyes up and see kind of where we're headed. And so as a parent and as anybody who you don't necessarily have to be a parent to have a limited time necessarily with your child. The Lord has placed people in your life, coworkers that you sit next to, that He has ordained to be there with you in a connection. And maybe you have a friendship with them, and there's an opportunity for you during the time that you are with them to live like Jesus would and to share the gospel with them. And so as we're talking necessarily about kids, it doesn't necessarily mean kids at the time is limited, but as believers, we interact with people daily. And we have an opportunity during the time that we spend with them to communicate what we believe and where our hope is placed. And kind of looking back as parents, I want to challenge you with one thing, parents. It says there's nothing more valuable spiritually than being present while your kids are present. And I oftentimes, as Zion's about ready to be 1 year old, I think about that all the time. Sometimes I come home and things are just busy, and as being a parent, you know what it's like, especially if your kids are involved in things and sports and work is stressful. But there is a limited time that you have necessary, let's say, influence over your child's life, the years that they are at home with you. And as a parent, be present while your child is there. And I want to be really clear that I'm not saying that the window for your kids to trust in Jesus is only limited and by a time standpoint. If we look at the criminal on the cross, he trusted in Jesus in his last moments of life. But what I do want to say is that there is a window where we have the most opportunity when the time is right to have those crucial conversations with people who are lost, not necessarily our kids. And so as you kind of look in your sphere of influence, who is in your life right now that you need to spend time with, sharing the gospel? And yes, there's nothing wrong with living our life. Obviously, that's a part of being a believer, living our life, giving testimony to who God is. But a part of that is speaking and telling about what we've trusted in. And I think about this, and even convicted by it when I think about the neighbors that live next door to us. Do they even know that I have a relationship with Jesus? Or do I even seek out opportunities to connect with them? Think about that all the time, that God has placed people in our lives that we need to have conversations with. And oftentimes being on staff at a church, I think, man, well, that time is right now, right here in front of you. But no, it's when I'm out eating dinner and having a conversation with my waiter and maybe even learning their name and thanking them for providing and helping serve our meal. There are awesome opportunities that we have every day. And so number 3, here's another rule that we can learn something from, is rule number 12. It says the baton shall be carried by hand throughout the race. If dropped, it shall be recovered by the athlete who dropped it. He or she may leave the assigned lane to retrieve the baton, provided no other runner is impeded on, and provided that by doing so, the distance to be covered is not lessened. So number 3, a dropped baton is not the end of the race. And so as long as if we look at this, the one who initially dropped the baton picks it back up. The runner doesn't obstruct any other race runners, and they don't cut the distance of the race short to grab the baton. And so what does this have to do with anything spiritual? It has a lot to do. There's all kinds of research, and being in youth ministry, you hear this all the time at conferences, and there's all types of research that are telling us that kids that leave youth group are abandoning their faith on in college. And there's a Gallup poll that says this: anywhere between 40 to 60 of graduates who were involved in their youth group will fail to stick to their faith during their college years. And for me, leading the student ministry, that is the most sobering and scary truth that we see. And so, as I was sharing earlier, we're always thinking about how can we cut that down? How can we equip students that they're not leaving their faith and abandoning it in their college years? Another thing we can do, we can sit here and we could play the blame game. We could say, oh, it's that crazy youth pastor's fault, it's the youth group, it's the parents' fault, it's the church's fault, or just fill in the blank. But I find the entire conversation frustrating. Don't get me wrong, I think there's a lot of blame to go around. And believe me, I'm the worst at blame shifting. You can ask my wife, constantly blame shifting. I didn't do that. I think the dog did it. And so I get this mental picture of runners in the race running, and they drop the baton, but they're all standing around, well, it was your fault, it was your fault, it was your fault, it was your fault. And no one is taking responsibility in it and just running, right? And so the key is responsibility. What if we stop talking about the drop baton and we start walking towards the baton? As parents, as students who are in our youth ministry, as believers, what if we stop the blame game and we stop, man, okay, we dropped the baton on that, and we just start walking towards it to pick it up? And so as we kind of finish here today, I want to challenge you with three different things. I think there's pretty much maybe sums up some of us in this room. And I think there's some of us in the room today who have fumbled the baton as we've tried to pass it on, maybe through hypocritical living or through neglect. But whatever the case, I want to encourage you to pick it back up and focus on passing it on to others. Maybe for me in high school, I can remember trying to share my faith with other people. I became a believer in high school, and I remember trying to share my faith with my friends who were not believers. And oftentimes I hurt myself by my witness. And I mean, man, they would never trust in Jesus because they know who I am and the filthy person that I am. What if I walk back and pick up that baton and I keep on moving? Secondly, maybe there's people in this room who have received the baton but may have dropped it. Maybe you were in a youth group growing up, and there was a season of time where you dropped the baton in your life. Or maybe you know of someone who's not here today. Maybe you've turned your back on God. Maybe you were caught in your own selfish desires. And maybe it's been kind of a slow kind of fade for you. Whatever the case is, pick it back up and focus on passing it on. And thirdly, to those who are carrying the baton into the takeover lane. Maybe you're a parent of a teenager, you're a small group leader, you serve in the kids ministry, maybe you're talking to somebody else at work, one of your coworkers, and you're about ready to in that takeover lane where you kind of start bringing the gospel to light. I want to challenge you, maybe if you feel like, man, I'm approaching this lane and the time is coming for me, and maybe I haven't done so well preparing up to the takeover lane, that I would carry the baton in my hand and I would keep pressing forward. And maybe for you, you need to think about who and how in your life. Who are the people that you have a relationship with who have not trusted in Jesus? And maybe you've not put the effort forward talking to them about who Jesus is. The time is limited. And this is the most important thing as the church that we have the opportunity to do, is to share about who Jesus is while we're gathered here on Sunday morning. You know, as we talk about students, and our hope is that they don't leave our Wednesday night program and then just pretend like nothing ever took place there and they go back to school. I want to challenge you as a church, as you return back to work, as you return to your family, that Sunday just wouldn't be this one boxed area in your life, but it would carry over to Monday morning in the way that you live your life. If you're a believer, you have this job, passing on the baton. And so I want to challenge you with that. This is our senior graduation service, but they have an opportunity. They're starting a new chapter in life to carry on the baton. But you as the church, as a believer, what does it look like for you? Because this is an awesome opportunity.